Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fortin, and we are here for a short story discussion. Look, there's a short story discussion playlist here on the channel and a short story review playlist here on the channel. The short story review playlist gets a little more in-depth into each of these pieces. With the short story discussion series, what I try to do is just sort of pick one idea and go with it. And today's short story is one of the best known short stories of the English language, and probably one of the most widely read, but I am willing to bet that it is not one of the most beloved short stories of the English language. It is a short story by James Joyce, hard to love James Joyce, and it is known as Araby. So what happens in this here short story, our main character, he's really got it in for his friend's sister. He spends time watching her and plotting on what he would say to her, spying on her in little ways, following her around and sort of daydreaming about intervening in her day and saying something that would sweep her off her feet. One day, however, instead of him talking to her, she talks to him. She asks him if he is going to the Araby, sort of marketplace, and he is so nervous when she talks to him. He doesn't even remember how he replied. He doesn't even remember what he said to her. He just said something, and she said that she could not go. She could not go because of her education and her, things that she's doing, prior commitments that she has, that would keep her from doing basically anything fun. If you want to look into that yourself. But eventually, he turns the conversation around and says, hey, if I do go, if I end up going to this Araby, I'll be sure to get you something. I'll pick up something for you. It is a small thing that he is going to try to do in order to ensure that he will be able to see her again, that he will be able to interact with her again. If he's got something for her, then he has an actual reason to go up to her and say, hey, baby, I got something for you. Let's talk. I got something for you. So if he does go and get her something, he gets to talk to her again. So, of course, he's going to go. But what he needs is he needs for his uncle to give him a couple dollars so that he can go and then he can get her something. He tells his uncle this, and he tells his uncle this, and he tells his uncle this, because he needs to go to the Araby. He needs to go and get this young lady something, and uncle's late home. And the Araby, this isn't a 24-hour place. This isn't IHOP, for Christ's sake. The Araby closes. So uncle's late, and uncle's late, and uncle's late. And what do you know? Maybe too late. And eventually, the uncle does get home. The uncle does gift him a couple dollars to go to the Araby, and he gets to the Araby, and most things at that point are closed. However, there are a few things still open, and he approaches one of these shops and is approached by the young lady that works at the shop, and she says, hey, you want to buy something? And he kind of flips out and says no, and gets huffy and puffy and goes home. So what happened here? What's the explanation for what's going on in this short story, and why does he get all huffy puffy at the end? Well, I think the reason for his huffy puffiness is outlined very early in the story. The reason for his huffy puffiness is sort of pointed at many times prior to the huffy puff. The first time that I think you have something literarily into which you might look is the mention of a blind street. Very early in the very first paragraph here. North Richmond Street, being blind, was a quiet street except at the hour when the Christian Brothers School set the boys free. An uninhabited house of 2 stories stood at the blind end, detached from its neighbors in a square ground. The other houses of the street, conscious of decent lives within them, gazed at one another with brown, imperturbable faces. So this sort of says we're probably in an upper-lower class, lower-middle class area, I think. This says to us that we're looking at an area where religion is playing a key role in people's lives. But the literary little deal here, blind street. Blind street means a dead end. That is just sort of what you're communicating when you say a blind street. Here in the United States, normally we would call that a dead end. Both of these terms, blind street as well as dead end, metaphorically, mean the same thing. If you tell someone they're on a dead end, if you tell someone they're in a dead end job, it's sort of the same thing as a blind street job. You're not going anywhere. You're stuck. Dead end job. It's done. You're at the pinnacle of where you're going to be, and where you're going to be is no place great. That is what dead end means. That is what blind street means on a metaphorical level. Then we get this little bit in the very next paragraph. He is listing off some books, and he says, he mentions the memoirs of Vidocq. I liked the last best because its leaves were yellow. Now, I've never read the memoirs of Vidocq, because it's French, and I know how to speak French, very fluid in French myself. But I did look it up, and apparently this is a book in which the main character is a police chief who is also a criminal. Being a police chief and a criminal, he is able to cover up his crimes. And during one of these crimes, he either flees the scene or somehow gets away dressed as a nun. So what he's doing there, what we're getting metaphorically there, is that he is covering, this main character in the memoirs of Vidocq is covering up his nastiness with religious garb. Covering up his nastiness, his devious nature, by parading in religious cloak. And why is it necessary that the pages are yellowed? The pages are yellowed in order to say that the story is lived with experience. So we have here the idea that a character is getting away with things because of a position of power, and in fact he gets away from something very key by disguising himself as a religious person, meaning that oftentimes those who seem pious are probably getting away with things not just under the surface, but getting away with things because of their public images being pious. So that tells us something to look for. The last thing here that I want to talk about before we get to the very end of the story, we've talked about getting away with things because of power and other people's perception of you. And we've talked about the idea of a blind street. We've talked about the idea of a dead end that is sort of planted here. We also get a little detail about the house itself. The house in which our main character lives was inherited by someone's sister. A priest had lived there, and when he died in the back room of this house, that priest left the house to his sister. Not a wife, not children, a sister. Now, I understand the implications of this, but what we're looking at is someone who did not have a romantic life. There is, at some point in here, someone else who is mentioned that is a widow. So the idea of losing love, the idea of never having someone to pass something on to, is firmly planted here. And then we have the very last page of this. This is while our main character is at the Araby and he has found a shop and approached it. Remembering with difficulty why I had come, I went over to one of the stalls and examined porcelain vases and flowered tea sets. At the door of the stall, a young lady was talking and laughing with two young gentlemen. I remarked their English accents and listened vaguely to their conversation. "Oh, I never said such a thing." "Oh, but you did." "Oh, but I didn't." "Didn't she say that?" "Yes, I heard her." "Oh, there's a fib." Observing me, the young lady came over and asked me if I wished to buy anything. The tone of her voice was not encouraging. She seemed to have spoken to me out of a sense of duty. I looked humbly at the great jars that stood like Eastern guards at the side of the dark entrance to the stall and murmured, "No, thank you." The young lady changed the position of one of the vases and went back to the two young men. They began to talk of the same subject. Once or twice the young lady glanced at me over her shoulder. I lingered before her stall, though I knew my stay was useless, to make my interest in her wares seem more real. Then I turned away slowly and walked down the middle of the bazaar. I allowed the 2 pennies to fall against the 6 pence in my pocket. I heard a voice call from one end of the gallery that the light was out. The upper part of the hall was now completely dark. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and derided by vanity, and my eyes burned with anguish and anger. So what we have here is we have our main character grafting the young lady at the stall onto the girl that he thinks he's in love with. Doing that, he then sees her flirting with 2 young men, both of them, right? Now, it must be said in our main character's defense, he seems pretty young. So this idea of ambiguous flirting, this idea of flirting with more than one person, sort of sets him off. And in the act of grafting this young lady at the stall on to the girl he thinks he's in love with, he notices that tone in her voice, that she's only speaking to him out of a sense of duty, out of something she feels she has to do. So, because of this, what he does in his mind is he's looking back at the girl he thinks he loves and hearing her speak to him in that conversation they were having, as if she had to speak to him, as if it was out of some sense of duty, and imagining her as this girl in the, what is going on outside? Sorry. Imagining the girl he loves as the girl in the booth, flirting with other men. So he's imagining, I don't really ever get to talk to this girl, the girl who I love. I just offered to buy her something. What if she did not talk to me because she likes me as well? What if she just talked to me because she felt, it was the nice thing to do, and I offered her, yeah, I'm going to get you something. But she's over here flirting with other people. And here I am loving exclusively her. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and derided by vanity. He was only thinking of himself. He was only thinking of himself. He wasn't thinking that she can be off talking to other people or anything like that. And if you want to get deeper into it, the 2 pennies jangling against the 6 pence in the pocket, there's some metaphor to be had there if you want to play with it, Don't play with it too much. Don't play with it in public, But it's there. And my eyes burned with anguish and anger. He's understanding. He thinks he's understanding that these things that he has for so long fantasized about may have been superfluous, may have been for nothing at all. So that is all I have for this short story discussion, a short story discussion of Araby by James Joyce. If you like this sort of thing, it really helps me out here on the channel if you hit that like button. And if you were here by chance but not design, and you want to make sure that YouTube continues to suggest videos like this to you, consider hitting that subscribe button, consider hitting the bell for notifications, and I hope to see you back for the next short story discussion, or whatever it is that we happen to be doing here when you return.